Alright guys, we're going to start today with this sheet that is a summary of World War II and that brings us into the Cold War. So let's go back to where we were just talking about before. And we had the causes of World War II right here. So the cause of World War II, think about this, that we have the two things, that we have the appeasement of the Allies and the aggression of the Axis powers. And it was that giving in of the British and the French and the aggression of the Japanese and Italians that is what led to the war. The official start of the war, for coming down here, the official start of the war is the German invasion of Poland. And then the German type of warfare, if you remember, is Blitzkrieg, which was to this lightning fast warfare. If we think about the stages, we had the first came the planes and the bombers, then came the tanks, then came the infantry. And it was to avoid that trench warfare, that static warfare of World War I. And like Mr. Witt keeps saying, it's that shock and awe that come in, that quick attack. So the U.S. gets involved in the war because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. We had been trying to stay out of the war, and we had been aiding the British prior to that. Then we have our Axis powers. So we have Germany, Italy, and that should be a separate line, Japan. And then we have in the Allied powers, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, America, France, and eventually, other countries like Canada, Australia. You don't have to add those if you don't want to. So we want to kind of focus on our big three, Britain, the Soviet Union, and America. The people to know. So who's the fascist dictator of Germany during World War II? Adolf Hitler. The fascist dictator of Italy during World War II, Benito Mussolini. The military leader and prime minister of Japan in World War II was Hideki Tojo. And do we remember who was the emperor of Japan during World War II? He didn't have any real power. Hirohito. And then the president of the United States for most of the war is, of course, FDR. And then who's the president at the end of the war, the one who drops the atomic bomb? That'd be Harry Truman. Stalin is the dictator of the Soviet Union during World War II. Remember, Stalin makes us sad because of his great purges. And then we have Winston Churchill as the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. Once you have those, we'll come down here. What ended World War II? The Americans dropping the atomic bomb on Japan, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So you don't have to write the president and the cities if you don't want. Just writing America dropping the atomic bomb on Japan is good. Okay, so just hit pause until everybody is ready. And once everybody is ready, then we'll go on to the second part of your sheet. So we're down here on the second part of our sheet, the outcomes of World War II. That's where we're going to start. That's kind of our important thing we're talking about today here. So the European powers' loss of empires. At the end of World War II, we're going to end up with two strong major powers. Everybody else has kind of fallen, and the two that we're left with are America and the Soviet Union. Then we have the war crimes that happen in Nuremberg and Tokyo, and this is where they put the Nazi leaders and the Japanese leaders on trial for what they had done. Italy is not put on trial because Mussolini was already taken care of by the Italian people. The division of Europe, this Iron Curtain is what Winston Churchill calls it. We're going to talk about that more, but you can see the image here. You see this black line here? This is representing the line that is drawn across Europe. It's an invisible line, and the blue is the democratic nations, and the red are the communist nations. The United Nations is established because the League of Nations had failed so epically, and one of the first things that it does is pass the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was led by Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wife. And this was, especially after the Holocaust, to show that there are rights everybody has basic. Then the Marshall Plan, which was a plan to help rebuild Europe by America. And then the formation of two opposing forces. Like I said, blue is NATO and red is Warsaw. So NATO, of course, being led by America and Britain and France, and then Warsaw being led by the Soviet Union. So make sure you have that filled in. An Iron Curtain has been drawn across Europe. So remember, during the Yalta Conference, they decided to divide Germany up. So Germany was divided among the Allies, even the city of Berlin, which is the capital. See, Berlin is right here in the middle of what was the Soviet territory, so they divided the city itself. Can you see how they divided the city here? The USSR controlled East Germany, and then the Allies, the Americans, the British, and the French, they combined their side into West Germany, and that was a democratic state, and it was free. So we're going to go into more detail into each of these. So once you finish with this, you can tuck this away in your binders. This will be number 24, and then we're going to do number 25 here in a few moments. And remember, just pause until everybody has got everything written down. Okay, guys, so here we have our Cold War notes. So the Cold War is not an actual official fight war. It's called a Cold War because it's a war of ideologies, meaning that America and the Soviet Union never met each other directly. So the Cold War is a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. So you should be filling in your blanks on your notes. And remember, the Soviet Union is the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. And this is the foundation of the Cold War. And basically what we have is the Democratic United States versus Communist Soviet Union. And by definition, they are enemies of each other. So the Cold War is a conflict between the USA and the Soviet Union, or USSR. And it led to an arms race, so which means that, think about arms like weapons, that from, which side could have the most weapons. And each side tried to have more weapons because if they had a bigger, badder weapon, then that would prevent the other side from attacking them. And this lasted from 1947 or 1946 to 1989. People debate on when the official start is. And remember that Mrs. Sprouse will pause this at any point to make sure that everybody has everything down before we go to the next slide, because I'm probably going to talk a little faster than we're able to write. So how did the Cold War start? Conflicting ideology. So an ideology is what you believe. And so we're talking about conflicting ideologies between America and the Soviet Union, and this is what leads to the Cold War. So remember, at the end of the Cold War, we have two superpowers emerge. And a superpower is a large area of land with a lot of resources. So it's a country that has a lot of resources, a lot of people, and America and the Soviet Union both had that. These are very powerful, influential nations. And they're the two strongest because Britain has been, bombed, and so has, France had been overtaken. Germany's got to be rebuilt. And so they're the two who are coming out. And so it's democracy and capitalism, or free enterprise, if you will, versus communism. So let's think about this for a minute. Who came up with the free enterprise or market economy system? Hopefully you answered Adam Smith, and his book was The Wealth of Nations. And then who came up with communism? That's Karl Marx, and he wrote, who was that other guy that everybody always forgets? Friedrich Engels, and together they wrote the Communist Manifesto, and then Marx wrote Das Kapital. Remember, how did communism get to the Soviet Union? Remember, they had the revolution, the Russian Revolution? Who led that revolution? That was Vladimir Lenin, and what group of people did he lead? Like, what was the revolution called? The Bolsheviks. So pause until you're ready to go to the next slide. So this is the different ideologies. America wants free trade. Everybody has their rights, and in Russia, people have rights too, but they're limited, and we want everybody to have the same amount of money. It's that whole kind of basic idea. Also, Russia wants to make sure they're never invaded again, because remember, Germany had invaded them, and so they want a nice buffer border so that nobody can attack them again. And this is just kind of a reminder about capitalism and communism, kind of those differences. So let's remember the Yalta Conference, the big three. So starting at the left, Who is this guy? Winston Churchill. And what country did he lead? Great Britain. And then we have FDR, who led America. And then we have Stalin, who led the Soviet Union. So, at the Yalta Conference, and again, we're just continuing on with your notes here. At the Yalta Conference, the big three decided what to do with Germany after World War II. And remember, what did we just say? They'd agreed to divide up Germany. Stalin said he would do free elections. Ha, 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 like he would ever follow through. And he agreed to join the war against Japan. One of the other things that they agreed to do was the United Nations, which was formed in 1945. And it was an organization to promote peace, which was what the League of Nations had tried to do, but it failed. This time the United States is going to be a member, and it is going to have an army. And then Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR's wife, she's the one who's going to help draft the UN Declaration of Rights. Pause until you're ready to go on to the next slide.